Chosen one, this is not for the faint-hearted. This is for the ones who've walked through storms with fire in their chest and silence on their lips. The ones who were counted out, talked about, underestimated, and still kept showing up with integrity that couldn't be bought, broken, or borrowed. Welcome. You're not here by accident. You didn't just survive, you transformed. While the world tried to shrink you, you expanded. While others lost themselves to bitterness, you rose rooted in something unshakable. They may not have clapped for you, they may not have understood you, but heaven did. You are not soft, you are sacred. You're the proof that pain can polish, that truth doesn't tremble, that some souls were built to lead even when walking alone. So take your seat, lift your chin, and remember this: you are not one of many. You are one of the rare, and the rare are never easy to explain, only impossible to ignore. Welcome to the space where the anointed stand tall. Let them watch. You're just getting started. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. Not everyone returns from the kind of emotional fractures that split the soul. Some shut the doors to their depth. Others camouflage themselves in the armor of what wounded them. And yet somehow there was a refusal to harden. Amid a world eager to chip away at tenderness, you remained unarmored. That's not endurance. That's quiet defiance. That's spirit disguised as insanity. Who remains soft when everything screams to turn to stone? If emotional labor had a currency, your worth would be immeasurable and still unpaid. There were days the burden should have made motion impossible, but you moved forward anyway, not triumphantly, not effortlessly, but deliberately. The kind of deliberate that turns teeth, brushing into a ritual of survival. You did not collapse when you were expected to. You entered rooms with wounds still whispering beneath your skin, answering messages with a shaking hand, carrying grief like invisible furniture strapped to your back. While the world applauded convenience and surface-level strength, you were navigating internal hurricanes in complete silence. No one noticed. There were no sirens, no witnesses, just you, a fragmented soul balancing life's demands like nothing was wrong. They called it resilience. You called it not having the luxury to fall apart. Step beyond the screen, join, and help light the way for others. You didn't get to pause and wait for healing. Healing met you mid-storm. It arrived without ceremony, half-formed, makeshift, and incomplete. You had to grow back pieces of yourself while still being expected to show up fully. The kindness you gave while breaking, that wasn't strategy. It was instinct. It wasn't your choice to carry everything alone, but it became your story. One not built on pity, but on an almost mythic ability to keep your humanity intact in a world that tried to strip it from you. They waited for a reaction loud enough to drown their guilt. Instead, they were met with your quiet. You didn't erupt, and that disturbed the script. You didn't hand back the pain that was given to you. You absorbed it, processed it, and returned something unrecognizably whole. While they prepared for your retaliation, you were already choosing peace. Not because it was easy, but because you knew violence of the soul is a cycle, not a cure. You walked out without ceremony, without shouting, without leaving a mess behind. That stillness, that was your protest. You didn't become the storm. You learned how to navigate through it without becoming weathered by it. You knew better than to match harm with harm, and that, your refusal to become venomous, was mistaken for weakness. But you weren't weak. You were a fortress of calm, with internal fires no one ever saw. Let them speculate. Let them wonder how silence could speak so loud. You mastered a kind of composure that doesn't require a stage. The war you won wasn't with them. It was with the part of yourself that could have surrendered. And it lost. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. The most baffling thing isn't that pain visited repeatedly. It's that gentleness never packed up and left. After everything that scraped the insides raw and rewrote trust into hesitation, warmth somehow remained. The outcome many expected was disappearance, retreat into silence, into suspicion, into emotional armor too thick to penetrate. But instead, you extended the same hands that were once burned, and that more than anything, rewrote the outcome. Most adopt distance after being deceived. They trade openness for shields, interaction for caution. But your response was not retreat, it was reconstruction. You gathered what was broken, not to build barriers, but to mold bridges no one believed could still stand. Others shrink to fit the safety of indifference. You expanded in spite of the bruises. Compassion bloomed where thorns once were. There's nothing passive about that. It's the kind of strength that doesn't roar. It radiates. Remaining gentle after injury is not instinctual. It's a repeated decision, an unseen act of defiance. Not apathy, not forgetting, but choosing not to mirror what cut you. You stitched your soul with threads of intention, not revenge. People think resistance lives in raised voices, but real resilience is found in continued kindness, when cruelty would have been easier. To carry yourself forward with unshaken grace while fragments still shift beneath your ribs. That's not just recovery, that's transcendence. Many don't understand the depth of such restoration because they never saw the daily labor behind it. You became an unseen force of endurance, smiling not to perform, but because your soul refused to stay dimmed. What they whisper about now, your unusual heart, is simply the visible trace of someone who refused to trade integrity for safety. When others chose detachment, you chose clarity. When bitterness knocked, you bolted the door. And in doing so, you turned vulnerability into legacy. Not everyone is wired to follow a pulse only they can hear. While most stay tethered to the visible and verifiable, you listen to the quiet certainty that couldn't be mapped or measured. And because of that, your path didn't look polished. It looked unpredictable, strange, sometimes even unwise to outside eyes. You bypassed paths that made sense on paper and stepped toward things that felt unreasonable but necessary. Where most seek approval before acting, you moved first and let understanding catch up later. It rattled people. Certainty without consensus makes the crowd nervous. They called it a phase, a rebellion, even delusion, because it didn't fit their formula. But conviction doesn't wait for consensus. While others mapped their lives with checklists, you navigated using intuition, sharp as lightning, brief, electric, undeniable. It took courage to exit comfort without applause, to silence the demand for explanation, to plant seeds others couldn't see the soil for. Your decisions looked reckless to those measuring success by safety, but they were led by something higher than calculation, clarity without confirmation. Now, time catches up to you. Paths once mocked begin to unfold in patterns. Those who watched with doubt now trace your steps in quiet study. They don't admit it, but something in your persistence shifted their understanding of what it means to be certain. You didn't build your foundation from evidence. They wanted logic. You trusted alignment. That distinction made all the difference. Step beyond the screen, join, and help light the way for others. The real transformation isn't that you were proven right. It's that you didn't need to be. You weren't chasing acknowledgement. You were answering a call only you could hear. And now, the very choices they questioned have become a mirror, reflecting what it means to live from inner truth, not outer validation. What once looked like madness now echoes as clarity too early understood. There's a rare type of silence that isn't born of fear or defeat, but of knowing. It watches quietly while falsehoods unravel themselves. While assumptions collect like dust on a shelf, the truth sits patient, untouched, knowing its moment will arrive without needing to be summoned. There was no urgency to explain, no need to chase shadows cast by others' projections. What looked like indifference was actually discipline, not passivity, but wisdom dressed in restraint. Accusations came, spun from nothing, crafted by minds who needed a villain to justify their own behavior. But there was no scramble to clear the smoke, no press conference, no frantic proof. Let them script their version. It was never yours to revise. Instead, you focused on becoming what their stories couldn't contain. While they echoed rumors in rooms built on doubt, you were building a foundation in silence. You understood something most don't. Clarity ages well. Time doesn't need an audience to do its work. Fabrications peel when no one's looking. And while they braced for your reaction, what they met instead was your calm. That unsettled them more than confrontation ever could. Because calm says, I already know how this ends. What they spun will eventually spin out. Misunderstandings only last as long as they're useful. When time finishes its slow unveiling, the same ones who drew conclusions will be forced to redraw them. That kind of confidence doesn't roar, it waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't explain itself. It just is. Letting them believe the wrong version of you was not surrender, it was strategy. Some things don't need defending, they just need time. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. There's a certain grace in giving what others never earned, not from blindness, but from conviction. While most calculate their giving, you offered without ledger. Not because you didn't see the imbalance, but because you saw something greater in choosing abundance when scarcity would have been easier. You reached for people who never reached back, not out of need, but out of knowing what it's like to be passed by. There was no scoreboard, no keeping track of who gave less or who stayed silent when you spoke with your full heart. You offered presence where there was absence. You answered absences with patience, not punishment. And that confused people who believed every gesture should be earned. They looked at your loyalty like a flaw, unable to understand giving without a receipt. But your compass wasn't broken. It just wasn't transactional. You poured not because they deserved, but because withholding wasn't in your nature. You didn't lower your standard because others refused to rise to it. You weren't naive. You weren't unaware. You just chose love over logic, again and again. That kind of giving doesn't just offer comfort, it reflects truth. It shows people a version of themselves they lost in the noise, the unguarded, the empathetic, the real. Your love held up a mirror. That's why they stayed close, even when they gave little. Because being near you reminded them of what they forgot they were capable of. Even when the table was lopsided, even when your plate was empty, you made room. Not because they earned it, but because you didn't need a reason to honor your essence. They couldn't replicate it because it wasn't about who they were, it was about who you refused to stop being. There's a distinct strength in offering your presence fully, even when you sense the temperature shift each time you're not convenient. The affection came with invisible strings, adjustments to your volume, edits to your light, pauses to your truth. You noticed the tilt in their tone when you stopped conforming. Love in their language was a contract cloaked in charm. Still, you stayed, not from blindness, and certainly not from lack, but from a deep-rooted desire to be an example of love without demands. You weren't expecting miracles, just a spark. Something in them to mirror back the wholeness you gave so freely. Not to change them, but to prove that love could be a steady flame instead of a spotlight with a switch. But not everyone changes when met with grace. Some settle in. Some see consistency as a faucet they can leave running. And when there's no consequence, they mistake your depth for dependency. What they didn't see was the quiet threshold, an internal gate that would not remain open forever. Your kindness was not permission to disregard. You knew what you were doing. This wasn't an attempt to fix what was broken. It was a conscious act of resistance, to love without strings, even after being tangled in them yourself. And when your care was mistaken for weakness, you didn't raise your voice. You removed your presence. The love didn't vanish. It simply outgrew the environment that couldn't hold it. Now the echo of your absence is louder than your presence ever was. Not because you left in bitterness, but because your leaving was a final lesson. Some only realize the value of what they had once it stopped showing up without question. The truth is, you didn't abandon them. You just stopped standing in a space that refused to make room for who you are becoming. It takes rare clarity to hold your center when the world tries to pull it apart in public. When your name became an object passed from mouth to mouth, twisted and reassembled without your consent, you didn't flinch. The spectacle played on, fueled by whispers and entertained by assumptions. You could have scrambled to clean the debris, but you didn't. You remained steady, whole, not because it didn't sting, but because you weren't built on their version of the story. Where others would have fractured, you practiced silence as strategy, not because you had nothing to say, but because not everything deserves a rebuttal. You were not made to perform pain for the satisfaction of spectators. What unsettled them wasn't your silence, it was your unwavering posture. You didn't bend under ridicule. You didn't dilute yourself to reclaim their comfort. You stayed rooted, even as they tried to cut your roots out in front of an audience. What they wanted was collapse. What they got was composure. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about refusing to become unrecognizable to yourself in the process. Your stillness wasn't weakness. It was clarity with a backbone. While they watched, waiting for the fall, they missed the quiet revolution unfolding. Your healing wasn't loud, but it was complete. Eventually, the air cleared. The fog of half-truths burned away under the heat of your integrity. And when it did, you didn't return with revenge. You didn't look for applause. You simply kept going, anchored in something no spotlight could validate. The noise faded, but your alignment remained. They threw stones hoping you'd shatter, but all they did was reveal what you're made of. That's not survival. It's mastery. And those who thought they'd write your ending now have to sit with the reality that you never stopped writing your own. There's a rare kind of wisdom that lets you stand beside those who've quietly aimed darts at your back and still choose not to strike. You recognize the tones they lowered when your name came up, the sudden stillness in conversations you weren't meant to overhear. You read the unspoken messages behind the forced laughter and carefully timed kindness. You knew what played out when you turned away. Still, you didn't dismantle them. You let their hands stay clean, even as you saw what they were hiding behind them. It wasn't because you were unaware. Far from it. You had already done the math, saw the pattern, noted the rehearsed empathy. But while they expected retaliation, you gave them quiet. While they anticipated a spectacle, you gave them stillness. Not because you owed them safety, but because protecting your own peace mattered more than exposing their truth. You weren't there to collect justice. You weren't there to match energy. You were there to outgrow it. It would have been easy to retaliate, to gather receipts, to flip the narrative, but you didn't need to. You had the discipline to let the fallout find them on its own, and it always does. Eventually, people meet the reflection of their choices. Your distance was deliberate. Your silence was a wall they couldn't climb. You did not swing back because you refused to dance with pettiness. That's not a lack of power. That's power mastered. You didn't protect them because they deserved it. You protected yourself from becoming unrecognizable. That choice, to hold yourself to a higher standard in the face of betrayal, is a type of legacy they can never rewrite. Now they struggle to understand how someone who saw through the performance still walked with such calm. They thought you didn't notice. What they missed was that you noticed everything and still chose elevation over exposure. That's not kindness they can comprehend. That's a kind of strength you don't teach. You are born with it. You earn it in silence, and you wear it without saying a word. Step beyond the screen. Join and help light the way for others. There are storms that don't just pass through your life. They try to tear you from the inside out. And you walked through one that most wouldn't survive with their identity intact. The kind of unraveling that doesn't just bruise. It tries to rewrite you. And the world watched, sure that you'd emerge unrecognizable. But instead of collapse, they witnessed something they weren't ready for. You remained whole. Pain came to claim you, but you refused to wear it like a costume. You could have let it change your tone, your trust, your tenderness, but you didn't. While others expected you to close off, you built wider doors. They waited for bitterness. You offered presence. They braced for vengeance. You responded with stillness. That kind of internal decision-making isn't softness. It's radical integrity. It would have been understandable to armor yourself, to move through life swinging with what hurt you. Instead, you walked forward, carrying the weight without transferring it. They thought you'd repay pain with damage. You returned it as growth. That confused them. Because people don't expect the hurt to become the healer. They don't expect light to remain after being dragged through ash. You didn't just live through what broke you. You refined in the process. That kind of clarity doesn't scream. It glows. You became living evidence that endurance isn't about how loudly you survive, but about how deeply you remain rooted in who you are, even when the world gives you every reason not to be. Now they use words like rare when they speak about you, not because you were untouched by the chaos, but because you weren't reshaped by it into something hard. You walked through fire and chose to carry water. That choice echoes louder than pain ever could. You didn't just overcome, you redefined what resilience looks like. Staying soft without losing strength, staying human when the world offered you every reason not to. There are moments when the easiest path is to burn it all down, to retaliate, to demand the final word, to let pride run the show. But you didn't follow that impulse. You went in the opposite direction, into the unknown terrain of inner excavation. You chose to unravel what was handed to you rather than pass it on. That decision cost you familiarity, comfort, and the illusion of control, but it gave you something far greater: liberation. You didn't chase validation or revenge. You chose to sit with the discomfort that most run from. You weren't looking for sympathy. You were looking for transformation. And that required staring at your own reflection and telling the truth no one else could say for you. Instead of disguising pain in performance, you peeled back layers and asked harder questions. That kind of confrontation, it's not glamorous, it's not loud. It's a quiet rebellion that most never start. The journey didn't spare you. You lost what once felt secure: titles, roles, attachments that no longer aligned. You shed versions of yourself built on survival instead of truth. It wasn't ego that led the way. It was a hunger for something real. Even when the cost felt unbearable, you leaned in, knowing that healing asks us to leave behind what once held us, even when it hurts. And now, you walk with clarity that can't be manufactured. You don't need to shout your story to prove anything. You carry it in how you move, in what you no longer chase, in how you no longer shrink. That's what makes you different. It's not that you avoided the fall, it's that you climbed back up without pretending it never happened. And in doing so, you redefined strength not as armor, but as the willingness to rebuild with honesty, again and again. Not everyone takes pain and reshapes it into sanctuary. Some inherit hurt and pass it down. Some react, retreat, or replicate. But you didn't. You chose the harder task, to hold your own ache, not as a weapon, but as a blueprint. You built what you never received. You became the presence you once ached for. There was no map, no model to follow, just instinct and intention. You knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be met with coldness when warmth was needed most. So you vowed, quietly, deeply, to be the presence that listens when no one else will, that sees past the walls, that doesn't flinch at someone else's chaos. You became the place people come to breathe. Not because it was easy, but because you made space for your own storms first. And in doing so, you learned to hold others without judgment, without needing to fix, just to witness. That kind of presence disarms people. It softens defenses. It forces honesty. Some are drawn in, others pulled away, because being seen so clearly can feel like both medicine and mirror.